Morning, all. All right, so we're going to start off today talking about the New York Islanders, the season preview for an Islanders team that's coming off of a playoff appearance but got eliminated in the first round. So making the playoffs, they've been able to do that. It's about being able to win in the playoffs. That has now become elusive. So 42, 31, and 9 put them at 15th overall, right? And they ended up being a wild card team and then being out in round one. Their goals scored per game, 2.95. That should be higher, right? So in this NHL that we have now, there's more than 3 goals being scored per game on average per team. So 2.95 is low. Now, 2.65 goals against tell you what you need to know about the Islanders. They've had elite defense and elite goaltending. They've been very good defensively, very good in net. It's about, trying to get more goals out of this team. So the power play is also indicative of this. 15.8% on the power play. That's not going to get it done. The penalty kill, very good at 82.2%. So those numbers combine to form 98, and that's problematic, right? They really do need to get that power play going. If they can get the power play going and keep the penalty kill at a really high rate, they'll win themselves more games. The last time they made the playoffs, of course, was this year, 2023. The last time they won around 2021. So they went to the Final Four back-to-back years, but it does feel like that magic's kind of gone since. They last won the Cup 1983. They last made it to the final in 1984. So it has been a while for fans of the Islanders since they saw a Stanley Cup final appearance, and it's about trying to get there. Now, with cap space, they don't have cap space. They're one of the many teams in the league right now that would probably love to add, and they don't have the money to do so, right? This is a team that we know could use a little bit more offensive spark, and if they had the money to do it in free agency, maybe they would have. Now, their leading scorer this past season was Brock Nelson. 82 games, 36 goals, 39 assists, 75 points. You'll notice Bo Horvat's not on the list because most of his points came while he was with Vancouver. I'm only posting points recorded by a player with that one organization when I talk about the top scorers. And in Horvat's case, it feels like since the scoring fell off when he was playing for the Islanders, that it'd be a little bit deceptive to have the combined numbers between Vancouver and the Islanders and slap that up there. Barzal played only 58 games this past season, 14 goals, 37 assists, 51 points. Barzal has a ton of talent. He's a very, very talented young player, and it really feels like he'd have more points if he was allowed to be just a little bit more creative. Anders Lee, 82 games, 28 goals, 22 assists, 50 points. He should threaten or eclipse 30 goals every year. Dobson has become a very good offensive defenseman for them. 78 games, 13 goals, 36 assists, 49 points. And J.G. Pajot, 70 games played, 13 goals, 27 assists, 40 points. I don't know if Pajot, if you could say he's living up to the contract he signed with the Islanders or not, but he's still a very useful two-way forward for them. So their goaltending really is quite the story, isn't it? Ilya Sorokin, 62 games, 31, 22, and 7 record, 924 save percentage. Just ridiculous numbers. Varlamov, who has opted to come back, 23 games for him, 11, 9, and 2 record, 913 save percentage. So we finally have a situation with the Islanders where there's a clear starter and a clear backup. Sorokin has won that job going away. And for Varlamov, he's probably going to play between 20 and 25 games again this year. Now, if Sorokin got hurt, that number would go up. But I don't think there's a lot of concern in the New York Islanders organization about goaltending this year. I will go as far as to say there's basically none. So their hits leader, Matt Martin, with 295. He is part of that identity line, a term that I know some people don't like. It's also a term that started to be distributed around the NHL. There's other teams, too, that have lines that suddenly become the identity line. Identity line is a forechecking, hitting, shot blocking type of line. It's your third or fourth line. And with Martin's line, it at one point seemed more like a third line to me with the Islanders, but it has become really a prototypical fourth line over the last couple of years. So block shots, Scott Mayfield led there with 168. He was going to be a UFA this summer, opted to re-sign with the Islanders instead. Posts, Anders Lee leads that category from the Islanders last season, only 6. So Anders Lee not hitting a ton of posts and got 28 goals, so pretty accurate shooting there. For the next one, I had a hard time coming up with somebody in their organization that I would say this guy projects to be a star. They do have players in their organization who are coming up that could very well be very good players for them, but finding somebody that I could say this could be the next Nelson or Barzal, not as easy. It doesn't mean he's not there. It's just I couldn't really pinpoint one for them. Fantasy sleeper, I went with Dufour. Dufour did play some games at the NHL level this past season. May get an opportunity to play in the NHL this year and play a prominent role if there's injuries. And so I figured, why not throw Dufour on the board? The MVP is Sorokin. If this team is going to get to the playoffs and do anything in said playoffs, it's probably going to come down to Ilya Sorokin. Whether that's great or bad news if you're an Islanders fan, I don't know. I mean, and I say that because if a team's relying on its goaltender, you can win a cup that way, but it's not easy. So, and like it's easy to win a cup. I'm just saying it's one of the more difficult routes. It's tough because I'm thinking back and going, well, is it? But anyways, Sorokin, if he gets red hot during the playoffs, of course, would make things a lot more difficult for the opposition, but they need to get more goals too, right? It does feel like the Islanders are the type of team that could get into a series where every game's 2-1, but they might be the team that gets the one goal in those games. So the schedule isn't bad for them. In October, they only play 8 games. Some teams play as many as 10, and 6 of those 8 are at home. So if they have a good record at UBS to start things off, they could get off to a very good start, which is a big turnaround from the long road trips we've seen from them early in seasons or to start seasons recently. And so, yeah, I think that's good for them, and they can get off to a good start to the season, which, of course, is key. Now, the channel vote. The channel vote indicates that people think the Islanders aren't quite in that elite level of the Metro Division. 4% said first or second for the Islanders. 29% said third or fourth. So 33% of the vote had them in the top half of the division. 58% said fifth or sixth. 9% of the vote said seventh or eighth. And fifth or sixth, I understand why people would feel that way. This is a team that I think when we talk about teams that miss the playoffs and who might they knock out, the Islanders are going to be a team that gets mentioned probably pretty regularly. So we'll see how everything goes. Now, in terms of additions, because of their cap space issues, there really wasn't much there. Gautier's added. Kuhlman's added. That's depth forwards in both cases. The exits, of course, they traded Josh Bailey so that the Hawks would buy him out. Zach Parise, I've got an asterisk next to Parise because Lou Lamoriello's made it clear that if Zach Parise decides he's coming back and playing this year, he has a job with the Islanders. We haven't heard a retirement announcement from him. It could happen. We absolutely could see Parise retire, but he can still play, and the Islanders have a spot for him if he wants it. Wotherspoon and Bardreau are also on the exit list. Bardreau seemed, kind of a fascinating option when he had his first call-up. It just didn't end up being sustainable from there. So for the Islanders, they are a middle-of-the-pack team. They need to find a way to get to be a top 10 team. Now, playoffs in 4 of the last 5 years tell you this is a consistently good team. So when you're trying to attract free agents, when you have the money to do so, that's something players are going to look at. Do I have a chance to win is one of the top questions, right? This is year 2 for Lane Lambert as the coach. I think Lambert's been a solid coach thus far. I was kind of surprised we didn't see more opening up. This is year 6 for Lou Lamoriello running the New York Islanders. And while he's done a very good job, I mean, he started out as GM having to navigate Tavares deciding he was going to go to Toronto and the hole that created in the lineup. And I think he's done a very good job of keeping the Islanders in the conversation for the playoffs, above the playoff line for the most part. But it's about building to potentially a championship, right? So I do think, and I've got it here to make sure I made this point, I really think they need to loosen up the reins a little bit from an offensive perspective. Their games are very fast. They had like the fastest period of hockey in one of their games this year. I think it was a 20-minute period, took, 24, 25 minutes, maybe 23. And this is a hallmark of Islander games. There's not very many whistles. You don't see very many penalties. And so as a result, you don't see a lot of goals. But I do think that if they allow for a little more creativity, sure, you might go offside a little more often. You're going to get more whistles. Your games are going to get a little longer, but you should score more goals. And especially with Barzal, a player who is very, very talented. Barzal is an assist machine. They've got Bo Horvat, who showed last year in Vancouver that if you get him in front of the net, he's very good at tipping pucks. And while that may seem like a minor talent, like, well, that's not a big deal, Joe Pavelski's made a living doing that, tipping pucks in front of the net, right? And so if they can get some kind of a setup where Barzal is getting it to a position where Horvat can just tip it over the goalie's pads into the net, you might be able to have a 35 goal season from Horvat. You might see Barzal reach, 60 assists in a season because he's still going to have Nelson to potentially pass it to, and it would really improve the power play as well. So I really think that if the New York Islanders take the reins off just a little bit, because again, I understand the defense kind of style that they play, and that's a large part of it, is this very defensive puck control style. But let players get really creative out there, and I think the Islanders are still in the conversation for the playoffs. But coming back to Bo Horvat, he has a lot to prove. Bo Horvat, upon arriving with the New York Islanders, signed an extension. There was discussion at the time that trade happened about whether or not it was just a rental, and then they signed him, and then people got mad about the signing. So the trade was not very well liked by a lot of people online from an Islanders perspective. I still understand what the Islanders were trying to do there, and I still think it was a good move. I do think the contract's expensive, but Horvat can win faceoffs. Horvat's a good player. He's not like the fastest skater on earth, but I don't think he hurts you with the skating either. And again, he showed in Vancouver that in the right situation, he can score a bunch of goals. And if he had stayed in Vancouver, he probably would have eclipsed 40, maybe ended up at about 45. But it's a matter of being put in that position by the New York Islanders, and it might mean changing up special teams just a little bit, which when your power play is at 15.8% is probably a good idea anyways. So the one question that I do have with the New York Islanders is their roster is going to be largely the same as last year. How do you get more goals? How do you make this work? And I think it's going to require some kind of a change in their game plan. The one thing with that, though, is that Lou Lamoriello, in keeping the roster largely the same and just getting rid of players that I think he kind of had to, like Bailey, that was a necessity for salary cap reasons. But yeah, it's a matter of making the right moves and getting this team over the top. If they end up about 15th overall again, they end up a wild card team and out in the first round, I don't know that we would look at that as a success. I think this team has to start getting further in the playoffs again, right? And show some sign that they're going to end that cup drought. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. What do you think the New York Islanders need to do, or do you think they're all set? They're going to be able to win with this roster just as is. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.